All right, welcome to the sixth and final installment of the Thanksgiving Lectures. This is a big one. The Plymouth Colony and the first Thanksgiving feast of 1621. We're going to wrap up the series today. The whole purpose of this series has been to address the question, what is the meaning of Thanksgiving? Obviously, gratitude plays a central role in the Thanksgiving holiday. But what else? Humility is taking a proper view of yourself, not thinking too highly of yourself. Understanding that there are higher things, that there are greater things than you. Humility. Reflection. Slowing down. Taking a proper perspective on things. Prayer. Acknowledging the Creator up above. Repentance. Acknowledging and seeking forgiveness for the wrongs that you have committed. Repentance goes hand in hand with humility. Liberty. How could we forget liberty? The freedom to worship according to one's own conscience. That's a central, foundational part of the Thanksgiving holiday. And of course, charity. Brotherly love, particularly in a familial context. All those things go into the Thanksgiving holiday. Now, if you didn't see part 5, you need to do so. The Pilgrims departed from the Netherlands in 1620. They went on the Speedwell, had to abandon it. We talked about that in the last video. They go on to Mayflower to cross the Atlantic. And what a voyage it is. It's a miracle that only 2 people died on that voyage. God indeed delivered them, as William Bradford later wrote, from all the perils and miseries of that vast and furious ocean. And in November of 1620, the passengers spot land. They're a lot further north than they anticipated. They thought they were going down to Hudson Bay. That creates some problems for the Pilgrims. But here's this new land. And the Pilgrims dock at Provincetown Harbor right there on the hook of Cape Cod Bay. Now, the 2 primary texts that I consulted in preparing for this lecture. There's 2. William Bradford. And William Bradford, who I've brought up before, he was, one of the original separatists back in that congregation in England. He was part of the Leiden congregation in the Netherlands. He came across the Atlantic, signed the Mayflower Compact. Well-educated man, although actually he was self-taught. He could read 6 languages: English, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, French, and Dutch. But Bradford kept a detailed journal and history of the Plymouth colony, which is integral to our knowledge of that colony. Bradford was elected governor of the Plymouth colony 30 separate times. They had annual elections in Plymouth, so he's a central figure. The other figure is a man who hasn't come up yet in this series, Edward Winslow. Winslow is also part of that Leiden congregation. Winslow also made the trek across the ocean on the Mayflower, signed the Mayflower Compact, and was one of the key leaders early on in that settlement. He authored a journal of the first year of the Plymouth settlement, and actually, as it so happens, this famous painting of the signing of the Mayflower Compact, you see a few figures here. There's William Brewster, who is the elder of the Leiden congregation, the spiritual leader of the Plymouth colony. We've mentioned him at length before. There's Captain Myles Standish, and there's Edward Winslow right there. Edward Winslow. Winslow explained the purpose and the why the Mayflower Compact was necessary in his journal. Remember where they're a lot further north than they thought. They were outside of the jurisdiction of the Virginia Company. They thought they were going to be under the government and jurisdiction of the Virginia Company. And now all of a sudden, they're in this land. They have no legal title to land from England. They have no authority to establish their own independent government. What are they going to do? According to Winslow, the day before we came to Harbor, that's Provincetown Harbor, observing some not well affected to unity and concord, but gave some appearance of faction, it was thought good there should be an association and agreement that we should combine together in one body, and to submit to such government and governors as we should, by common consent, agree to make and choose, and set our hands to this. And so that's what they came up with. It's known as the Mayflower Compact. It was called, in the original document, the agreement between the settlers of New Plymouth. Settlers agreed amongst themselves. It was a constitutional document of sorts. They don't make an agreement with the king, as we see with with Magna Carta, but amongst themselves to enact, constitute, and frame just and equal laws. This is an important document in American history. Just and equal laws for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience, establishing essentially majority consent for the government being established in the Plymouth colony. John Carver was elected governor. Myles Standish was elected commander of the militia. He was hired for that role, but the passengers wanted to ratify that position by a democratic process. And so it begins. Now, the big question is, where are they going to settle? They don't know. Where do you settle? You need to send an exploratory party out to find a suitable place for settlement. That's what they do. Captain Myles Standish leads a band of armed men to explore the area. It's what's known as the hook of the Cape Cod Bay. And so they go on their expedition. They had to go on a few of them. I won't detail them here. While they are exploring, the rest of the passengers are on the Mayflower. In fact, actually, there was a pregnant woman on board the Mayflower, Susanna White, who gave birth to a son during this time while they were docked at Provincetown. She named her son Peregrine, which means coming from abroad or migrating. Peregrine White, he's the first English child born in New England. The baby boy survived the upcoming harsh winter. His father didn't, by the way. His father died that winter. And then his mother married Edward Winslow, who I mentioned before, and kept that journal. And Peregrine White he lived till 1704 when he died at the old age of 83 years old. Well, anyway, that happened on board at Provincetown Harbor. Unfortunately, a few of the passengers died of disease while they were awaiting the next move. Where are they going to settle? Now, there were Native Americans in the immediate region called the Nauset Indians, or sometimes referred to as the Cape Cod Indians. This was not their first encounter, or this was not the Indians' first sight of Englishmen. They had seen Englishmen before. English fishermen and some English explorers had come to the region. But this is the first attempt at a permanent settlement. On one occasion, Myles Standish and his men, it was 4 days after they first came on shore, Standish and his men found 5 or 6 Indians and a dog camped, but the Indians fled. Ran away before the English could approach them. The English chased after them, but lost them. And so there was no direct encounter. William Bradford was part of this expedition, and actually at one point he got caught in a deer trap that had been set by the Indians, and the trap flipped him upside down by the legs. Well, so far nothing that would work for a settlement as Standish saw it. So they kept exploring, and then by mid-December, Standish and his men came to the western coast of Cape Cod Bay And right here, just adjacent to Plymouth Harbor, Standish and his men found cleared fields. Explain why in a moment. Cleared fields, running fresh water, and then a prominent hill for defensive purposes. And then this beautiful harbor. They called the area Plymouth, called the harbor Plymouth Harbor. Went back to Provincetown Harbor to tell the passengers that this was the spot. And on December 21st, the Mayflower came to anchor in Plymouth Harbor. And this is a famous painting of the Mayflower at Plymouth Harbor. The passengers disembarking at Plymouth Rock were not entirely sure that they actually stepped on a rock at Plymouth when they disembarked. We don't have any contemporary sources saying so, but maybe that passed down orally. We don't know for certain. But the challenges are, this is just the beginning. As we will see, it's December in New England. Not a good time to attempt to build a settlement in New England. In fact, it's the worst time to do it. Now, why was the land cleared? Well, formerly, there had been a people who lived in the area, and they were a tribe of Indians called the Patuxet. The Patuxet Indians. And at their peak, a few years before, they might have numbered, and it's hard to know for certain, but may have numbered possibly about 2,000 people. And they inhabited this area on the western coast of Cape Cod Bay and cleared the land primarily for planting corn and beans. The Patuxet were a tribe that belonged to the Wampanoag Confederation. And the Wampanoag was a loose confederation of Indian tribes who lived in what today is southeastern Massachusetts. It includes Martha's Vineyard and most of this area, some of Rhode Island. Doesn't include the hook of Cape Cod Bay where the Pilgrims initially encountered Indians, but most of this area here, the Patuxet, were part of that group. The Wampanoag were a semi-sedentary people, meaning the men seasonally traveled far for seasonal hunts and fishing. While the women stayed behind and cultivated varieties of maize or Indian corn, beans, and squash. And this is a recreation of a Wampanoag village today, a photograph of that recreation. Maize, beans, and squash are sometimes referred to as the Three Sisters, the crops that were grown by the Wampanoag and most of the New England Indians. The women also gathered wild fruits, nuts, berries, shellfish. And so the Wampanoag lived off of fishing, planting, hunting, harvesting. The Patuxet were one of those tribes, but sometime around 1615, maybe 1616, so about 4, maybe 5 years prior, a devastating plague swept through coastal New England. A plague that was probably started through contact with either English fishermen further north or French fur traders also further north. We don't know exactly, one of those two likely, but this plague wiped out 100% of the Patuxet. Wiped them out, -1. We'll see who that one is and why that one survived. Devastating plague. And this was true for all the Wampanoag, by the way. The Wampanoag, maybe as much as half to 3/4 of the Wampanoag, were killed by this epidemic. And so when the English arrived, cleared fields conveniently ready for tillage, the land deserted. A horror and tragedy for clearly the Patuxet, but also for the Wampanoag, a blessing for the Pilgrims to arrive at this land, and it's just ready to begin cultivating without any immediate inhabitants. Later that summer, William Bradford, or excuse me, a group of English explorers, William Bradford records what happened on this expedition. A group of English explorers ventured to visit Massosoit, who was the great sachem of the Wampanoag. Bring him up in a moment. They went to visit Massosoit, and they discovered evidence of this plague. And Bradford writes this of the Wampanoag: the people, not many, being dead and abundantly wasted in the late great mortality which fell in all these parts about 3 years before the coming of the English, wherein thousands of them died. They, not being able to bury one another, their skulls and bones were found in many places lying still above ground, where their houses and dwellings had been, a very sad spectacle to behold. And the Pilgrims themselves are about to behold a very sad and terrifying spectacle in their own right, because that winter has approached. And boy, it's a harsh winter in 1620 to 1621. William Bradford later described the winters of New England as, quote, sharp and violent. The ground, he said, was now all covered with snow and hard frozen. A frozen ground. The weather was very cold. Pilgrims immediately went to work building houses to shelter them through the winter. And they classed the people into 19 different groups. If you're a family, you were automatically in a group. But if you're a single man, you were assigned to a group, so that you don't have your own house. If you're a single man, you're going to be in a particular group to reduce the number of houses that you need to build. But all through this time, they heard, you've got the wilderness, the thick forests, the sound of wolves. On occasion, they heard the sound of Indians. They didn't see any Indians, or no direct encounter or contact with the Indians, but they would hear them, or they would see the smoke of their fires. Bradford said this: what could they see but a hideous and desolate wilderness, full of wild beasts and wild men? The whole country, full of woods and thickets, represented a wild and savage hue. If they looked behind them, there was the mighty ocean, which they had passed, and was now as a main bar and gulf to separate them from all the civil parts of the world. And so there's the original house that they built. They ended up having to, immediately after it was built, had to be converted into a hospital, because as it so happened, many of the colonists that winter became gravely sick. An epidemic spread through first the Mayflower. Many of the colonists came down with scurvy, which results from eating too much salted foods. William Bradford wrote this: in these hard and difficult beginnings, they found some discontents and murmurings arise amongst some, and mutinous speeches and carriages in others. But they were soon quelled and overcome by the wisdom, patience, and just and equal carriage of things by the governor and better part, which clave faithfully together in the main. Oh boy, that's hard to get through. John Carver was one of those leaders that tried to rally the people as best as he could through this harsh winter. William Brewster was another one, senior elder of the colony. By the way, he lives another 25 years after the landing at Plymouth and became known as the, quote, patriarch of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Colony. During the months of January and February, get this, during the months of January and February, 2 or 3 people died every single day. 2 or 3 people died every single day. Remember, this is a group that numbered only 102 people. By the end of winter, only 44 of that original 102 survived. That, it's stated differently, 57% of the original colonists who landed at Plymouth died that winter. Only 43% survived. Brewster never got sick. Never got sick. He's one of the few men that never got sick. Standish, the military leader, never got sick. So the spiritual leader and the military leader were preserved from the illness. What an illness it was. What a winter it was. Bradford himself became deathly ill, almost died, described himself as having been in a, quote, low and sick condition that winter. There were only, at any one time, there were only 6 or 7 adult men who were even available to toil and to work. Only 6 or 7 men available at any one time to toil or to work. The Mayflower became a hospital ship, and then again, the main house, when it was completed, became a hospital. This is a terrible time, a terrible season to live through. So let me remind you again, that Mayflower voyage, all those, the 3.5 months that they were stuck on that ship, first in England, it took a month and a half to finally get off, and then crossing the Atlantic, another, I think it was 66 days, just, and then they're here, and it's winter, and over half of the colonists died. This is a great painting. This is right there in the middle of the winter. There's Brewster, the great elder and spiritual leader of the colony, attempting to just keep things together, shepherding the flock. There's Standish, remaining strong and firm in the midst of this great and tremendous time of tribulation for the Pilgrims. There's the first house, again, became a hospital. The Pilgrims feared that if the Indians, who they still haven't made contact with, that if the Indians noticed how many people were dropping, how many people are dying, that this would betray the settlement's weakness and that the Indians would attack. And so the English buried the dead in unmarked graves in the middle of night in order to help conceal what was going on. Finally, by March, some other buildings have been built. Things are starting to, coming out of winter, things are starting to look up a little bit, but man, what a trial they've just gone through, and no contact yet with the Indians. The Indians are there. William Bradford said this, all this while the Indians came skulking about them and would sometimes show themselves aloof off, but when any approached near them, they would run away. And then, on March 26, 1621, a tall man with long black hair came walking into the Pilgrims' village, looked the Pilgrims straight in the eye, and said, "Welcome, Englishmen." Welcome, Englishmen. He then reportedly asked if he could have a beer. Pilgrims are. What? Could not believe their eyes. Could not believe their eyes and their ears. He comes and speaks English. It wasn't perfect English. It was broken English, but still. Welcome, Englishmen. After all these months, over half of the colonists have fallen dead. Things look just, for some people, seem hopeless. Others, they're clinging on to hope, but this is based on their faith in God, that God's going to carry them through. And then this man arrives. This man arrives. Samoset revealed that, or his name was Samoset. Samoset revealed that he had come from further northeast. He lived off the coast of what today is Maine. And it was there that he had encountered some English fishermen. English fishermen for decades had visited the coast of Maine, and they were itinerant fishermen, so they didn't establish permanent settlements. They just went there to fish and then went back. And Samoset had learned English from those people. Samoset described to them what was going on in the area, the different peoples living in the area. He explained to them that there were people named the Patuxet who lived there and wiped out about a few years prior due to a disease. Samoset arrived as a representative of Massasoit Ousamequin, who is the great sachem of the Wampanoag Confederation. Now, Massasoit, sometimes you'll hear it pronounced Massasoit. Massasoit means great sachem. It was more of the title. Ousamequin means yellow feather. Massasoit was the great sachem of the Wampanoag Confederation, and Massasoit himself came from a tribe. He was the chief sachem of the Pokanoket, who were part of the Wampanoag Confederation. The Pokanoket, which lied about 40 miles west of where the English had settled. Massasoit knew of the English arrival months before, but had a decision to make. Does he seek an alliance with the English? That's the decision. Or do you team up with some of the surrounding tribes and throw the English out? Massasoit chooses alliance with the English. And one of the reasons for that, among many, was that the Wampanoag, and the Pokanoket in particular, were enemies of the Narragansett. The Narragansett were a much more numerous and powerful people. They settled in the area of what today is Rhode Island, to the southwest of the Pokanoket. And the Narragansett were largely untouched by that great epidemic that had swept through and wiped out many of the Wampanoag. And so Massasoit figures, he knows the English are powerful. He knows about the English, and he calculates that an alliance with the English will help counter any potential attack from the Narragansett. Remember, I mean, the Native Americans were, these tribes for years, decades, had been at war on and off with one another. And so Massasoit figures that this alliance might work, but he needs to make contact with them naturally first. And so he uses Samoset as the way to do that. And so Samoset speaks to the English. William Bradford records some of this for us and says, "A certain Indian came boldly amongst them and spoke to them in broken English, which they could well understand, but marveled at it." Okay? Marveled at it. Try to appreciate just how miraculous this was, that this Indian came and said, "Welcome, Englishmen," and could communicate with them in their own language. Edward Winslow records more details of this event for us. He, that is Samoset, very boldly came all alone and along the houses straight to the common meeting house, where we intercepted him, not suffering him to go in, as undoubtedly he would, out of his boldness. He saluted us in English and bade us welcome, for he had learned some broken English among the Englishmen that came to fish. We questioned him of many things. He was stark naked, only a leather about his waist. He had a bow and 2 arrows. He was a tall, straight man, the hair of his head black, long behind, only short before, none on his face at all. He asked for some beer, but we gave him strong water and biscuit, and butter, and cheese, and pudding, and a piece of mallard, all which he liked well, and had been acquainted with such amongst the English. He told us the place where we now live is called Patuxet, and that about 4 years ago all the inhabitants died of an extraordinary plague, and there is neither man, woman, nor child remaining, as indeed we have found none, so as there is none to hinder our possession or to lay claim unto it. Moreover, William Bradford commented, Samoset, quote, told them also of another Indian whose name was Squanto, a native of this place, who had been in England and could speak better English than himself. All of this happens in a day. Just the whole script just flips for the English. Okay? Again, take a moment to try to fully grasp the significance of this encounter. You've just undergone so many trials, over half of your settlement gone, wiped out by this previous winter. And then this man comes in speaking English and then announces to you that there's another man who knows better English than even himself and who had been to England. And this revelation happens all at once. It changes the whole game. It turns everything around for this fledgling settlement. Samoset lodged with the English that night. When he departed, the English gave him a knife, a bracelet, and a ring. And then Samoset promised to return in a day or two with some more Indians. He did just that. He came with 5 more Indians, brought some deer skins to trade. Pilgrims declined to trade because it happened to be the Sabbath day, a Sunday. But the English said, we are interested in trading. Winslow said, quote, they had every man a deer skin on him, and the principal of them had a wildcat skin or such like on the one arm. We gave them entertainment as we thought was them. They did eat liberally of our English victuals. They made semblance unto us of friendship and amity. They sang and danced after their manner. Some of them had their faces painted black from the forehead to the chin, 4 or 5 fingers broad. Samoset stayed with them a couple nights, departed Wednesday morning, and the English sent him off with a hat, a pair of stockings, a pair of shoes, a shirt, and a larger piece of cloth to tie about his waist. And then shortly after, Samoset returned with Squanto, or his full name, most likely, Tiquantum. Squanto is likely the nickname that William Bradford gave him. So you'll see him referred to both. Edward Winslow refers to him as Tiquantum. Bradford calls him Squanto. We'll go back and forth between the two names. Tiquantum comes, speaks just near perfect English. Samoset was correct. And the Pilgrims are just blown away. It's a miracle. And he was friendly and eager to help the English. Well, how did he know English? What happened to this man that caused him to learn English so masterfully and caused him to go to England? Well, Squanto explained, he said, I was part of the Patuxet tribe. The Patuxet tribe. when in 1614, two English vessels who were exploring the coast of New England arrived. This was part of Captain John Smith's exploratory voyage of New England in 1614. Captain John Smith, the same man of Jamestown fame. The master of one of those vessels, whose name was Thomas Hunt, was on his voyage with Captain John Smith. Hunt abducted, kidnapped 24 Indians, including Squanto, and then ventured off to Spain with the intent of selling those Indians into slavery. Squanto, and we don't know exactly how, managed to get away for England, got over to London, was entertained by a merchant there in London, and he lived there for a while. We don't know exactly how long, but for a while. And it's possible, some historians have speculated that Tiquantum may have met Pocahontas while he was in London, because Pocahontas was also in London at the same time from Virginia. We don't know for certain, but it's certainly possible. So think of, for a man like Squanto, think of the culture shock of all of this. You've been uprooted from your land, abducted from your native land, brought over to Spain, and now you're in London, a city of 200,000 people, completely different customs and culture and amazing things, but also some disturbing things. And how do you even begin to make sense of what you see? Tiquantum learns English, becomes fluent in the language. The merchant who entertained him then employed Squanto to go to Newfoundland. And from Newfoundland, an English explorer took him back to his native village. Squanto returns to his native village in 1619, 5 years after he had been abducted, and finds out that his entire tribe had been completely wiped out by the epidemic. He is the last of the Patuxet, the last of his tribe. Tiquantum then goes off and lives with the Pokanoket. He's taken in by Massasoit, and then a year later, the English arrive at Plymouth Harbor. Squanto is you cannot overstate the immense blessing that Squanto was to the English. It was an extraordinarily difficult task for European colonists to learn the Indian languages without an interpreter. The French had an enormously difficult time with this in Canada. Here, you have a man ready to function as an interpreter, and he's eager to help. He was friendly with the English and ultimately lives among the English for 20 months, helping them through this difficult time. He's taken in by Massasoit. Naturally, Squanto tells Massasoit all about England and London. According to Bradford, Squanto told Massasoit, quote, what wonders he had seen, end quote, in London. And it was Squanto who urged Massasoit to become allies with the English. He said, look, these are powerful people. You don't understand. You want to make an alliance with these people. Okay? And you do that, that will protect you from the Narragansett to your southwest, or to the Massachusetts to your north. It will constrain your enemies, and they'll refrain from attacking you if you have the English on your side. Massasoit takes the advice and decides to attempt an alliance with the English. In April of 1621, Massasoit and 60 warriors approach the English settlement at Plymouth. Edward Winslow records for us. They arrived near the village, stood at the top of a hill overlooking the settlement, so that, quote, we could well behold them and they us. Winslow continues, we were not willing to send our governor to them, and they unwilling to come to us. So Tiquantum went again unto him, that is to Massasoit, who brought word that we should send one to parley with him, which we did. We sent to the king, that is Massasoit, a pair of knives and a copper chain with a jewel at it. Our messenger, who was Edward Winslow, made a speech unto him that King James saluted him with words of love and peace. And Squanto had informed Massasoit precisely who King James is. And that King James, quote, did accept of him as his friend and ally, and that our governor desired to see him and to truck with him or to trade with him and to confirm a peace with him as his next neighbor. Massasoit liked well of the speech and heard it attentively. Standish was there and motioned to Massasoit that he could follow him down to the settlement where Massasoit might meet the governor, John Carver. Captain Standish then, quote, conducted him to a house then in building, where we placed a green rug and 3 or 4 cushions. Then instantly came our governor with drum and trumpet after him, and some few musketeers. After salutations, our governor kissing his hand, the king kissed him, and so they sat down. The governor called for some strong water and drunk to him, and he drunk a great draught that made him sweat all the while after. He called for a little fresh meat, which the king, that is Massasoit, did eat willingly, and did give his followers. Then they treated of peace. All the while Massasoit sat by the governor, he trembled for fear. In his person he is a very lusty man, in his best years, an able body, grave of countenance, and spare of speech. In his attire, little or nothing differing from the rest of his followers, only in a great chain of white bone beads about his neck, and at it being his neck hangs a little bag of tobacco. His face was painted with a sad red, and oiled both head and face, that he looked greasily. All his followers likewise were in their faces, in part or in whole, painted, some black, some red, some yellow, and some white, some with crosses and other antic works. Some had skins on them, and some naked, all strong, tall, all men in appearance. So after all was done, the governor conducted him to the brook, and there they embraced each other, and he departed. This peace treaty signed, brokered by Tiquantum, acting as the interpreter, as the mediator between the two sides. This peace treaty established that neither side shall do harm to the other. The Wampanoag or the English shall not do harm to one another. Now, if any person within their group did harm, that person would be delivered up to the other party for punishment. Any stolen goods would be returned. And in the event of an unjust war involving either side, the other party would ally with them in that war. And so this is the beginning of a long treaty, a treaty that lasts many years, 40 years, actually more than 40 years. This peace between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims survives. Now, as it so happened, shortly after the peace treaty was signed, John Carver suddenly and unexpectedly died. He was working in a field, died in April of 1621. He was only 56 years old. The colonists elected William Bradford to replace him. Brewster was one of his main advisors, and Standish was another chief advisor of Bradford. Standish had actually cared for Bradford when Bradford was sick the previous winter, and they had become very close. This peace and alliance lasts through the 1660s. Massasoit is the chief sachem of the Wampanoag up through his death around 1662. The English spoke very highly of Massasoit. He was said to be a very peaceful man, a very honest man, rational man, and an excellent leader. And so the peace lasted through his lifetime. A faithful ally of the English. This was critical. It did create increased tension between the Wampanoag and the Narragansett. There were other surrounding Indian tribes that did not like this alliance, of course, and the English later go to war with some of those other tribes, but the peace with the Wampanoag remains for a generation. Here are some of the surrounding groups: the Pequot, the Narragansett, the Massachusetts. These are outside of Massasoit's jurisdiction, but that peace with Massasoit lasts for a generation. Massasoit, Bradford tells us, returned to his residence, but Squanto continued with them and was their interpreter and was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. He directed them how to set their corn, where to take fish, and to procure other commodities, and was also their pilot to bring them to unknown places for their profit, and never left them till he died, which was in 1622, shortly after. He was a native of this place, and scarce any left alive besides himself. Squanto, one of the big things that he does, and he lived amongst them for 20 months. Again, translator, guide, advisor. The English had some trouble with the seeds that they had brought over from England. They brought seeds for wheat and peas, but it didn't work out. Squanto taught them how to cultivate the soil in New England. Taught them, hey, look, if you fertilize the soil with alewives, and an alewife was a type of herring that was very abundant in the surrounding brooks, especially during the spring, which is when Squanto came to them. If you put the alewives in the soil, that will fertilize the soil and will give you a more abundant crop. Acted as a guide, pictured here. Introduced them to the fur trade later in the 1620s. The fur trade will be the most profitable economic activity of the Plymouth colony. There was another important man who lived among the English and helped the English. His name was Hobbamock. And Hobbamock also served as a guide, as an advisor, as an interpreter. Standish, in particular, really respected and trusted Hobbamock. Sometimes Hobbamock and Squanto were at odds with one another. There was a bit of a rivalry there. Massasoit probably sent Hobbamock to the Plymouth settlement to keep an eye on Squanto, make sure he wasn't double dealing or anything. Hobbamock purportedly converted to Christianity and was a friend of the English until he died in 1642. But he was also very critical in these early years of the Plymouth settlement. So everything's changed, like quite rapidly, within a few weeks. Again, miracle. William Bradford writes this: the spring now approaching, it pleased God, the mortality began to cease amongst them, and the sick and lame recovered apace, which put, as it were, new life into them. Though they had borne their sad affliction with much patience and contentedness. But it was the Lord which upheld them, and had beforehand prepared them, many having long borne the yoke, yea, from their youth. I mean, they were, look, I mean, the colonists, they had hard times before, okay? Remember, it's the early 17th century. It was a tough world, okay? It's not that they hadn't experienced trial and tribulation, but this was particularly hard. But they bore it, Bradford says, with patience and contentedness, and now new life breathed into the settlement. Now you have some more houses constructed, an actual village of sorts. dare I say, town constructed in Plymouth. Again, this is the reconstruction that you can visit today. Notice how close this is to Plymouth Harbor. You see the sea there. And actually, the Mayflower was still in the harbor up through April, waiting. In the middle of April, the Mayflower departed America to return to England. Despite all that they had gone through that previous winter, all the death, not a single one of the Pilgrims left Plymouth Colony to go back to England with the Mayflower. That's pretty incredible. Okay, it also goes to show just how things are beginning to look up. There's an optimistic spirit running through the camp. With the help of Squanto, the English are planting, sowing, cultivating the soil. Winslow said this: "We set the last spring some 20 acres of Indian corn, and sowed some 6 acres of barley and peas. And according to the manner of the Indians, we manured the ground with herrings, which we take in great abundance, or which we have in great abundance and take with great ease at our doors." Winslow and some of the others, Standish, visited Massasoit in June in his village. He went 40 miles west of the settlement to visit the Pokanoket village where Massasoit resided. And Massasoit and many of his people came from time to time to Plymouth to visit the English. This friendship had continued. Actually, the Massasoit and the Pokanoket came quite often. They brought their wives and their children with them. And at a certain point, at one point, the Pilgrims had to tell Massasoit, "Okay, we enjoy seeing everyone, but we're having difficulty entertaining you because our food supply is a little precarious. So, just to let you know." And so they had to work out some sort of arrangement to accommodate that. But Winslow said this: "We have found the Indians very faithful in their covenant of peace with us, very loving and ready to pleasure us. We often go to them and they come to us. Some of us have been 50 miles by land in the country with them. Yea, it has pleased God so to possess the Indians with a fear of us and love unto us, that not only the greatest king amongst them, called Massasoit, but also all the princes and peoples round about us have either made suit unto us or been glad of any occasion to make peace with us." He's referring to here to lesser sachems within the Wampanoag Confederation who answered to Massasoit. Massasoit assured that they made peace with the English. "There's now great peace amongst the Indians themselves," Winslow said, which was not formerly, neither would have been but for us. A bit arrogant to say. "And we, for our parts, walk as peaceably and safely in the wood as in the highways of England. We entertain them familiarly in our houses, and they as friendly, bestowing their venison on us. They are people without any religion or knowledge of God, yet very trusty, quick of apprehension, ripe-witted, just. The men and women go naked, only a skin about their middles." So Winslow is reporting back to England his observations and comments on the local natives of New England. There's a cornfield in the Plymouth region. Bradford writes this: "By the summer of 1621, they began now to gather in the small harvest they had, and to fit up their houses and dwellings against winter, being all well recovered in health and strength." What a blessing! Well recovered in health and strength, and had all things in good plenty. The turnaround is pretty impressive, okay? "For as some were thus employed in affairs abroad, others were exercised in fishing, cod and bass, and other fish, of which they took good store, of which every family had their portion. All the summer there was no want." So we have cod, bass. It's called Cape Cod for a reason. Fish in abundance. And now, Bradford said, in the autumn, began to come in store of fowl, as winter approached, of which this place did abound. So waterfowl. And besides waterfowl, there was great store of wild turkeys, of which they took many, besides venison. And the corn, the Indian corn, an abundant crop. Our corn, Winslow said, did prove well. And God be praised, we had a good increase of Indian corn, and our barley indifferent good. But our peas not worth the gathering, for we feared they were too late sown. They came up very well and blossomed, but the sun parched them into blossom. But an abundant crop of Indian corn, good meat, venison, turkey, waterfowl, fish in total abundance. And so, sometime in the autumn of 1621, the Pilgrims hosted a great feast, the Thanksgiving feast of 1621, a 3-day long feast. It's only very sparsely documented. We don't have a whole lot of details of it. We don't know precisely what date it occurred. It's likely that it was either between late September and early November, maybe October. Likely October. Sometime between late September and early November, the feast was 3 days. The adult Pilgrim women, along with their daughters, prepared the food. They gave thanks, praising God for helping them to persevere. Yes, the trial was hard. Yes, they lost loved ones, spouses, children. But here they were. God brought them to a land that they could cultivate, a land with Indians who knew English and who made peace with them and helped them to grow this crop. And the harvest was great. And the abundance of meat, so much to be thankful for. One of the only accounts we have of this is from Edward Winslow. Winslow writes this: "Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling." So the harvest is done. The governor takes 4 men, go fowling. Get you some fowl. So we might have a special manner rejoice together after we had gathered the fruit of our labor. So in other words, we've had this great harvest. We want to have a day of feast of Thanksgiving. So go get some fowl. Let's add to the feast. Therefore, the 4 men in one day killed as much fowl as with a little help beside served the company almost a week. Almost a week. There was so much meat to enjoy. At which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms. Many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among the rest, their greatest king, Massosoit. Massasoit arrives with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. 90 Native Americans, all from the Wampanoag Confederation, so Wampanoag Indians, 53 Pilgrims, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted, and they went out, the Indians that is, and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor, William Bradford, and upon the captain, Myles Standish, and others. And although it be not always so plentiful as it was at this time with us, yet by the goodness of God we are so far from want that we often wish you over in England partakers of our plenty. This is an astounding statement. So for context here, Winslow is addressing people in England and telling them about what's going on. And he said, think of this. I mean, just what 9 months before, half the colony is lying dead. Food is scarce. Okay. Now we are so far from want that we often wish you over there in England partakers of our plenty. It's amazing. It's a miracle. It's reason to bow the knee and thank God. It's a reason to celebrate, to give thanks, and to partake with the Indians who were so integral to that success. These things I thought good to let you understand, Winslow said to the people over in England, being the truth of things as near as I could experimentally take knowledge of, and that you might on our behalf give God thanks, who hath dealt so favorably with us. And that's what we know about Thanksgiving. That's all we need to know, really, about that first Thanksgiving feast. That tells us what we need to know about it. By the end of the year, by December of 1621, the English had built 7 dwelling houses and 4 public buildings. And they had plans for additional construction. What is the meaning of Thanksgiving? Gratitude, humility, reflection, prayer, repentance, liberty, charity, and brotherly love. I hope that you had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. If you're watching this in a future year, I hope that you have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday and that you have a greater appreciation after watching this little mini-series of what Thanksgiving is all about, why we celebrate it, and why it is truly the greatest of our national holidays. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, share it. Share it with others so that they might also partake in this story, this great American story. So long, and God bless. See you next time. Bye.